German soldiers and officers who were captured during or after the end of the bloody World War II did not show much eagerness or persistence in organizing and carrying out escapes from prisoner of war camps. This circumstance was explained by a number of objective and subjective reasons, among which the main and determining factor was the significant geographical distance of the camps, specially created for the detention of prisoners of war from the western borders of the Soviet Union. This made a self-sufficient and safe return home practically impossible and extremely difficult for an ordinary German soldier. Firstly, any fugitive who escaped from a prisoner of war camp was easily and quickly identified and recognized by his specific clothing, which differed significantly from the ordinary civilian clothing of Soviet citizens, as well as by his general appearance, which did not match the appearance of the local population. Secondly, the overwhelming majority of German prisoners either had no knowledge of the Russian language at all, which created enormous difficulties and problems for them, or had very limited and superficial knowledge, which significantly hampered and made practically impossible any attempt to successfully escape and survive in a foreign and unfamiliar country. In addition, the conditions of detention for certain categories of prisoners of war were not as unbearable, terrible, and inhumane as one might have assumed based on the general difficult situation in the post-war country. In particular, higher-ranking officers who were captured were usually placed in specially designated separate camps, where they were provided with better and more balanced nutrition, as well as more comfortable and favorable conditions of detention, which was noticeably different from the daily life of ordinary rank-and-file prisoners of war. Also, ordinary soldiers and officers in the post-war years, when hunger and poverty in the country gradually receded, did not die from exhaustion and starvation in prisoner of war camps, although, of course, their lives could not be called easy and carefree. Veteran of the Great Patriotic War, the respected Mikhail Alexandrovich Yegorov spoke in detail about the daily life of German prisoners of war in Soviet camps, their life and customs. In his memoirs and reminiscences after his demobilization from the ranks of the Soviet Army in 1946, Yegorov was sent to work in a large industrial city of Sverdlovsk, namely to the Nizhny Osetsky prisoner of war camp, which was assigned serial number 314. These valuable and unique memories, which are of great historical interest, were accidentally discovered in archives by historian Andrei Yermolenko and later published for the general public, in order to familiarize them with the life of prisoners of war on both sides of the conflict. Yegorov recalls a curious and indicative case when 3 German generals, on their own initiative and voluntarily, engaged in rather monotonous, routine, and hard work, extracting old nails from old wooden boards, while adhering to a strict daily norm of 5 kilograms per person. Another German prisoner of war, who, as it turned out, was an engineer by his civilian specialty, actively helped the Soviet side in working on various construction and technical projects, applying all his knowledge and skills before the start of any construction work that was carried out in the camp or in the surrounding areas. All the project and estimate documentation was mandatory, thoroughly checked by the captured German engineer, who, having the appropriate professional experience and qualifications, identified numerous errors, shortcomings, inaccuracies, inconsistencies, and obvious blunders, after which he made the necessary corrections and adjustments, thereby preventing possible negative consequences. We ask you to subscribe to our channel and like the video so that you can hear many more interesting stories about World War II and the opinions of all participants about certain events. Yegorov's memoirs also describe completely unusual, sometimes even curious and ridiculous cases from the daily life of former German servicemen who were in Soviet captivity, which shows that even in difficult conditions, people tried to maintain their sense of humor and human dignity. For example, 2 German prisoners of war, who were held in one of the camps in the city of Degtyarsk, were sent to a penalty cell for some violation of the camp regime, which was a special room designed for the punishment of delinquent prisoners. One of them, as it turned out later, was from a noble aristocratic family, came from a family with long traditions, and the second was an ordinary commoner from the lower strata of society. The noble German had a slightly longer period of stay in the penalty cell than his comrade. Therefore, before his release, which was to take place a few days later, he gave the commoner 25 rubles, which was a rather large sum under the conditions of the camp, with a request to buy a rabbit for a festive dinner that he solemnly intended to arrange on the day of his release from the isolation ward, which, ironically, coincided with his birthday. The assignment, as he was told, was fulfilled, and the rabbit, as he thought, was bought. At first glance, based on the above-described case, the impression was created that German prisoners of war, despite all the hardships and deprivations of captivity, were generally doing well and did not experience severe suffering and deprivation. However, when these two prisoners of war were about to be sent to their homeland, to Germany, a fierce quarrel arose between them, and the commoner angrily revealed the whole unsightly truth about the rabbit. It turned out that instead of a rabbit, the noble German, experiencing severe hunger and despair, ate an ordinary cat and simply and banally appropriated the money allocated for the purchase of the animal, deceiving his comrade. During a fierce argument, unable to restrain himself, he angrily declared, "I may not be a Vaughan, but I didn't eat cats." And only then did it become clear that he, instead of buying a rabbit in the market, had prepared and eaten an ordinary cat, and had simply pocketed all the money, leaving his cellmate with nothing. Despite the seeming hopelessness and the complete absence of any prospects for a successful outcome, German prisoners of war still from time to time made desperate attempts to escape. Although they were not particularly frequent and massive, and were far from always successful, such cases were especially noted in camps located in the Urals, where natural conditions and terrain features could contribute to the successful implementation of the escape. In the city of Karpinsk, located in the Urals, two prisoners, showing ingenuity, resourcefulness, and outstanding engineering skills, independently made a homemade compass from improvised materials, using the parts and materials available to them. One day, seizing a suitable and convenient moment, and taking advantage of the weakening of the guards' vigilance, they managed to leave the camp territory safely and unnoticed, overcoming all obstacles and barriers. Using the compass as a landmark, they traveled a considerable distance through the forest and eventually reached the Kakva River, where they were incredibly lucky and found a boat left by someone on the shore. The Germans immediately got into the boat, hoping for luck, and sailed down the river, hoping to get as far away from the camp as possible. It seemed that luck had finally smiled on them, and now the dogs, which would undoubtedly be set on their trail, would not be able to find them. However, it was completely unclear what specific plans and intentions they had next: to hide in remote and impassable forests, or to walk on foot across the entire vast, endless Russia to Germany itself, which was practically unrealistic and impossible. Unfortunately, it was not possible to find out their further plans and intentions, because the tired and exhausted German prisoners of war, worn out by hard camp work, chronic lack of sleep, and poor nutrition, simply could not stand the strain and fatigue, and simply fell asleep right in the boat, without reaching their goal. As a result, the boat, which was drifting on the river, was washed ashore, and quite unexpectedly for them, they were discovered by a passing veteran of the Great Patriotic War, who, not being confused in such an unexpected situation, reacted quickly, competently, and calmly, showing due vigilance and responsibility. The day was very hot and sultry. The sun was scorching mercilessly, and the Germans in the boat were so exhausted that they instantly and soundly fell asleep, not even noticing how their boat slowly and smoothly washed ashore. The passing frontline soldier, who knew German well, did not lose his composure when he saw them, quickly assessed the situation, and, without hesitation, commanded them in a loud and sonorous voice, "Hand hoch." In this clumsy annoying and offensive way, the fugitives were caught and returned to the prisoner of war camp without being able to properly and fully enjoy their long-awaited freedom. Another large-scale, well-thought-out, carefully developed, and planned escape was being prepared by high-ranking German prisoners in 1953 in a camp located in the city of Degtyarsk in the Urals. The group of conspirators was headed and led by the former commander of a Luftwaffe aviation division, Oberst Hayo Hermann, who had extensive experience and skills in organizing such events. The development of the escape plan was approached with maximum responsibility and seriousness, understanding all the risks and dangers. May 1st was chosen as the date of the escape, when the camp administration, according to a long-standing tradition, was supposed to celebrate the holiday and, therefore, weaken vigilance and control over the prisoners, which was beneficial to potential escapees. In advance, in the strictest secrecy, underground passages leading outside the camp territory were dug and laid, which required great effort, time, and certain skills. It only remained to wait for the right moment and use these passages to successfully leave the camp territory and escape pursuit. Then the prisoners planned to reach the territory of northern Kazakhstan, which was a sparsely populated and remote area, and there established contact with German special settlers who could provide them with the necessary help and support. With their help, they hoped to cross the Caspian Sea to Iran, where some of the officers had established contacts with the local population and representatives of German diasporas. This plan, at first glance, seemed a little crazy, daring, and adventurous, but who knows, perhaps it would have succeeded under more favorable circumstances and a lucky combination of circumstances. However, one of the other prisoners, for reasons that have not been established and have not been fully clarified, simply went to the camp administration and reported on his comrades, revealing all their secret designs, plans, and intentions without knowing what it might end up with. After that, all the participants in the conspiracy were immediately placed under special supervision in a specially equipped barrack, where they remained until they were sent home to Germany, without implementing their daring plan. There were actually many more stories about escapes, both successful and unsuccessful, than we know from open sources. However, most of them are still stored in closed archives, nevertheless representing a huge and invaluable interest for historians engaged in the study of this difficult and tragic period in human history. In total, during the years of the Bloody War, approximately 2,389,560 German soldiers and officers were captured, who were in Soviet prisoner of war camps for a long time. In October 1955, after the official and very important visit of the Chancellor of the Federal Republic of Germany, Konrad Adenauer, to the Soviet Union, the Presidium of the Supreme Soviet of the USSR issued a decree on the early release and repatriation of German prisoners of war convicted of war crimes, which became an important step on the path to reconciliation between the two countries. By mid-1956, almost all German prisoners of war who were in Soviet camps had been released and returned home, which allowed many of them to return to their normal civilian lives. An exception was made only for individual servicemen whose fates turned out in a special way, not like the majority, and who for one reason or another could not return to their homeland in 1956. For example, Toman Rash, who spent 53 years in Soviet captivity, since he was in a psychiatric hospital for a long time for treatment, where he received the necessary medical care, but in the end, thanks to the efforts of human rights organizations. In 2000, he was also repatriated and was able to return home to his relatives and loved ones. Goodbye. We were glad to see you on our channel. Don't forget to write comments, give likes, and subscribe to the channel.